Undertaking investigative journalism takes a certain commitment. Even if the journalist is passionate about their subject matter, and possibly because they are passionate about it, and it means they'll go into more depth than usual, this does not make the work quick or easy. It requires a certain confidence, can involve lengthy periods of delving through data, and can even lead to a certain amount of risk, which we'll come to in a later resource. So why do investigative journalism in the first place? Well, aside of the often personal motivation and glory, journalists working in this field recognise the value of their work. We can think about this in a number of ways. First of all, people have a right to know and understand about the society in which they live. Even if we don't necessarily agree with the statement that knowledge is power, it makes us aware, it equips us with understanding that can help us make decisions or oppose the order that we would otherwise have to accept without that knowledge. When we talk about society, we might be talking about their immediate locality, where an investigation could be looking at how local government funds are used in different ways. As taxpayers, individuals might think differently about their money going towards the upkeep of flower beds in the park, as opposed to fixing holes in the road. Of course, some people will be concerned by the flower beds, but probably many more will be road users, so one thing to keep in mind when undertaking investigations is the audience. How many people are affected by the issue you're exploring? Then, more broadly, there are national and global concerns. If your government has gone to war under false pretences, or provided weapons to other countries, that kind of knowledge will inform whether you are likely to vote them into power next time round. We also wield power as consumers, ethically choosing how we live our lives. In many instances, we may suspect or have known for some time that one multinational corporation or another is not operating in ways that we're entirely comfortable with, but sometimes the details or illustrations that can come from more in-depth investigation are what unsettles us to the point of changing our spending habits. Coca-Cola is one of the largest companies in the world, but when we see their grip in certain areas, we might think differently about buying that next bottle. It is with this knowledge of the problems of Coca-Cola alongside malnutrition in Mexico that led to the eventual enforcement of a tax on soda in that country. In other cases, companies we had assumed were operating within standards we felt comfortable with may have some unsavoury aspect of their business unearthed that makes us feel differently about them. Two examples of such companies who had otherwise largely been seen in a positive light are Apple and Amazon. In 2006, the UK's Mail on Sunday newspaper reported on terrible working conditions in Chinese factories supplying parts for Apple products. This led Apple to look into the situation, but it was maybe the further report of 14 suicides amongst workers that most memorably now sticks with many Apple's consumers, or at least potential consumers. Recent reports such as a 2013 German television investigation of Amazon's working environment have also led to a shift in how we perceive that company, alongside concerns about how much or how little tax they pay against their earnings. Investigations in these areas can not only impart a better understanding of a company's practices, but also urge consumers to boycott or otherwise object. Investigative journalism is also valuable in redressing the balance of power. Governments, companies and organisations have power that they can abuse, either through how they act and the ways that we are then able to respond to their actions, or through the way their activities are talked about in the media, where they may have influence over aspects of this, such as Monsanto putting pressure on Fox News to report falsely on their drugs. Problems arise when some forms of media might favour certain voices, so that we hear the same narratives from the same companies or politicians, and we might think of this as an abuse of power. When we talk about media plurality, about giving audiences the maximum number of sources for their information and news, and with it strands that are alternative to the mainstream, then we can see that investigative journalism can have a role in showing the other side of the coin to those favoured by such powerful organisations. It can help to paint a fuller, rounded picture of the subject matter, rather than just the outline that is provided in the first instance. But investigative journalism sometimes has a value in uncovering loopholes or incompetence as well, where the wrongdoing isn't exactly intentional but can lead to dangerous precedents. In many such cases, the act of being uncovered can be enough to change the way organisations go about their business, as they attempt to demonstrate the innocence and then fix the problem. In other situations, a little more pressure is required from the audiences of this journalism. One example of this is Arab reporters for investigative journalism who discovered a loophole in law whereby rapists could avoid prosecution by marrying their victims, but then fail to carry through or support their wives. This investigation ultimately led to the Jordanian government considering reforms. As briefly discussed earlier, journalism can also investigate how people perform in their jobs, or whether organisations such as governments are acting accordingly. If a charity is supposed to be using donated funds in a particular way, are they? If a politician makes certain promises in the lead up to an election as part of their campaign, then they are held accountable to them in the future when elected, and it is the role of the investigative journalist to delve through such statements to cover that story. And as readers, made aware through such journalism, we are empowered to vote, choose companies, stage protests, or otherwise more directly object, as we often see in online petitions such as those carried out on websites such as change.org. These days, it is not just about making choices based on the knowledge, but reacting more actively too. Of course, journalism in itself is only so powerful. It can make us aware and shed light on the dark corners that those in power would prefer to remain hidden. It can rally readers around a cause, but it's debatable whether it should go to such lengths if it is to remain objective and unbiased. Is the role of journalism to present the facts from their various sources, or to campaign and promote a cause? In the case of investigative journalism, this might make an interesting point for discussion. But essentially, the extent of these powers end there. Journalists cannot directly apply the law and prosecute in the way parliaments, councils, courts, commissions, the police and other authorities can. Investigative journalism might lead to this happening either by presenting findings to those authorities or through public pressure, but they are not capable of it in themselves. It might also gather the evidence and put in some of the time that police or other agencies can't afford in order to present a solid case for legal or criminal investigation. Of course, in some scenarios, such as companies avoiding paying tax, where they are seen to be playing the game of the law without actually breaking it, there is no case for prosecution, but investigative journalism can expose the company for moral and ethical scrutiny by society. And, of course, sometimes journalism itself must be taken to task. This can be on the micro level, where sources, data, photography or video pertaining to tell a particular story requires fact-checking and verification. This is where tools such as Medan's Check Desk platform comes into play, and we've of course looked at this in the first set of resources on the Arab Citizen Media site. But more widely, journalism and its structures are sometimes found to be corrupted. Most notably, in the UK at least, we can look at the Leveson inquiry, which was a major police investigation and public inquiry that took place after the News of the World newspaper was found to have hacked phone messages of various public and celebrity figures in the UK. The Guardian newspaper were partly responsible for exposing these practices, leading to this very high-profile case, which was more widely changed UK society's perception of print media. So far I've been talking about mainstream contexts, but what about citizen journalism? Do these kinds of investigation have the same value to society when they're carried out by someone who isn't tied to a large organisation, where their distribution channels might not be so widespread? We might think about the amount of effort and time input versus the likely readership. Is it worth it if only a few hundred people are likely to read it? As citizen journalists yourself, you're likely to appreciate what your audience looks like, but then is it with numbers that you value your work, or making a truth known to just a few people that may be just as relevant to you? And more to the point, if the story is large enough and shared, retweeted or otherwise seen by just a few key people online, it can be suddenly blooming into something much larger and may even get press attention in itself. When citizen journalists undertake such investigations, could it be argued that it loses a sense of authority for some readers? If your readers are ongoing and loyal, maybe not, as they've already chosen you as a trusted source of news in the past. But for those coming across your work for the first time, it is maybe true that you'd need to double-check accuracy and verification across your whole narrative. On the other hand, citizen or blogger journalists might be perceived as free from the capitalist or political agendas of mainstream media, where the hierarchy between writer and reader is a lot flatter, often with more participation involved. They might be seen as one of the people investigating for the people. Finally, one good measure is the extent to which you as a citizen feel passionate, intrigued, emotional, angry, or otherwise affected by a story you're about to investigate. If it fuels a fire in you and seems on the cusp of shedding light into some corner that would otherwise remain hidden, chances are it will be just as powerful for other readers out there.